Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. Let's get started.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. As you can see, I am taking over for Tia today. I am usually the host of another two shows, but since Tia is away, I'll be taking over for her. In today's episode, we're talking a little bit about anger. And, while anger is a natural emotion and reaction to situations, sometimes it can go into an excessive route. And there can be some sort of side effects and things that happen when that's taken a bit too far. So here to help me talk about it is Jessica Chu. Now, she is a principal clinical psychologist. She's worked in a number of mental health settings from crisis support to child protection, aged care, acute hospitals, and chronic pain services. And today she's going to be our guest in talking about anger. How are you going today, Jessica?
Hi, good. Thanks, Dita. How are you?
I'm really good. It's been a cold morning in Melbourne, but so far it's been nice.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's not too bad here in Brisbane at the moment.
Oh, it's nice. I love Brisbane weather.
Yeah, it could be hit or miss, humidity or heat, but otherwise good.
True. Okay, that's a really good point. So, talking about anger, how did you sort of get into sort of helping people in the clinical psychologist field that you are in now?
Yeah, sure. So I was always interested in the human mind and about, why we do what we do. The emotions being, so pervasive in our everyday lives, and anger being one of those kind of, bad emotion. But learning more about it through my studies, just recognizing that it's just a normal thing that we experience, and to take it as a bit of information and learn what to do with it. Yeah.
So it's amazing when talking about clinical psychology and the whole field, because it's not something that you sort of just stumble upon in doing it as a profession. It's something that you really found a passion in. So how did you sort of even get into the field that you're in now?
Yeah, sure. So in high school, I was going through a difficult time with my family, and just knowing that, people, just seeing like all of the different struggles from people of immigrant backgrounds and things like that, it really sparked an interest for me, just in terms of, this topic of mental health. So I started to become interested early on in high school, and then started to pursue that through my studies at university. And that's sort of led me to where I am today in terms of my own practice with my business partner. We wanted to help the culturally and linguistically diverse population a bit more, and just to have like a different setting for psychology, because typically it's been very much like, Freud on the couch, tell me your feelings, everything's about your dreams. But, we have a different vibe now.
Well, that's good. I think I remember talking to a psychologist very early on in my life, and it was just like sitting on a seat and talking to them. And it's very interesting how people say that it's a very different way that it's done now. There are so many different methods in order to sort of get a person to open up and talk a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's a conversation, right? Like, there's two people in the room. Yeah. I work only with adults, so I treat you as the expert in your own life, and what's going on for you. So it doesn't make sense for me to just sit there passively listening to you talk the whole time and just judge, and analyze. It doesn't make any sense. So we do just sort of working together more collaboratively. And yeah, like that's, I think where psychology is more at these days, you know, where we see the client as, you know, an active participant.
Yeah, see, that's really good. I feel like movies do psychologists so dirty when it comes to how it's done.
Yes, I cannot watch I cannot watch a psychologist in a movie without cringing so hard. I'm like, ethical dilemmas everywhere.
I know. So before we start talking about anger and how it occurs, we love to start the guest off talking a little bit more about themselves in a little icebreaker that we love to play. So it's just to get to know you a little bit more with these different sections.
Yep.
So yeah, just share the first thing that sort of comes to mind.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay, so the first one is a favorite book of yours.
I don't know if it's a favorite, but I just recently finished reading The Circle by Dave Eggers.
Okay.
And it was really interesting because like taking, you know, all of the social media stuff, tracking data stuff to like the nth degree, where, you know, basically you can know everything about everyone if you so happen to desire. And just like obviously the ethical concerns around that and just this like kind of human need for control. So I found that really fascinating, you know, just reading it, but also as a psychologist, I was like, oh, it's juicy.
Is it fictional or is it non-fictional?
Fiction.
Okay.
Thankfully fiction. So going into like tracking people and stuff like that. And I was just like, whoa, there's a lot.
So it definitely doesn't seem like a light read for sure.
No, the way that it's come across is like, you know, this workplace as a utopian, like, oh, this is like the best workplace. It's so technologically advanced, know everything. It's like one of those awesome tech startups. But yeah, there's also this like darker side that's kind of explored. So I found that quite fascinating.
Yeah, no, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to have to try to Google that straight after this and see if I've read it or not. The next one is a favorite movie of yours.
Yes. So definitely favorite is The Crow, 90s movie with Brandon Lee in it. It's like this grungy 90s film about this guy who is killed, his partner's killed, and then he comes back as this like, I don't know, as a mythical creature or something, and he exacts revenge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's very dark. But the reason I love it so much is because despite being dark, there's these really hilarious like 90s one-liners and like really humorous little moments here and there sprinkled throughout. And there's this line in the movie that says, "It can't rain all the time." And so I really love it because it's like, you know, there is this light in it, even though the topic itself and like the way that it's filmed is quite dark. And obviously with Brandon as well, like, passing in the movie. Yeah. So.
No. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I love when they aim it to be a really dark cinematic kind of film, but then suddenly they sort of add the humor to it a little bit more.
For sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
The next one is a favorite podcast that you have.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
I'll go for it.
Yeah. Okay.
We're so friendly here.
Okay. Awesome. So Do You Fucking Mind is a really great podcast that I love listening to. She's, I think it's Alexis. She studies neuroscience. But she's all about like self-love and, you know, not letting people cross your boundary. And she swears a lot in it. So I'm all for it. Like sometimes you just need that friend who like kicks you in the butt a bit and like, what are you doing? And I feel like that's what she does. So I love it. And then she weaves in all the science facts about the brain. So all for that.
Yeah, that sounds like a really interesting one. I'm definitely gonna search that now. I think because she swears, it sort of hits a little bit more.
Exactly. It's just like, it's all good when everyone's like calm and stuff, but someone's swearing at you and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. All right, friend. I'll do it.
That's definitely a train listen then.
Yeah, anyway, yep.
The next one is my personal favorite area is a famous role model that you look up to.
Yeah, so like tracking on from Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee, his dad.
Okay.
Yeah. So I really resonated with Bruce when I was growing up, because I did martial arts as well, but also just like philosophy on things. It really aligns with my values as well around, flexibility. So not just like being like, oh, I have to do things one certain way. That idea of being water, and, moving around obstacles along the way, but also utilizing your own strengths. So his whole martial art that he created, Jeet Kune Do, was like around, not being so prescriptive like some of the other ones. Like use what you've got, utilize your strength, and, work around some of the other stuff, and, you can kind of figure things out as you go.
No, it sounds very interesting, because when you hear Bruce Lee, you think about his movies and you think about all the films that he's been in, but you never really think about who they are as a person. So hearing that really opens up your understanding to him a little bit more.
Yeah. So no, definitely love his movies as well. Asian representation. But he did have this like really interesting philosophical side to him too, so I always found that interesting, and it did align with how I think about and how I practice my psychology as well.
Wow, see, I can see why that's role model then. And the last one is a course that you've completed.
As in like my uni degree?
I think an interesting course. Like it could be a small course or a little lecture that you've been to or anything like that.
Okay. Ooh. I was once interested in doing forensic science, so I did like a free online course one time. And
wow. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, why not? Because I did want to do forensic psychology when I was younger. But like I said, dabbling into forensic science and learning about how they like solve different crimes and stuff like that. And it's just so interesting. I don't know what else to say.
Because every time I see a career, I suddenly want to be it. So I'm very much, I'll go in and just try any kind of course. So that's a really interesting course to get into. Yeah, for sure. I don't know if I get into the career because I don't know if I'm cut out for that. But yeah, it's always intriguing learning about it. Yes, no, for sure. So now we've moved on to talking about a little bit more about anger. But before we do that, I love to start off with the question with every guest. Why is resilience important in our life?
Yeah, for sure. So resilience is important because obviously life isn't perfect. No one's perfect. And sometimes, for lack of a better term, shit happens. And, when that does happen, then, we have to have some resilience in order to get through it and be able to overcome some of those obstacles. So, yeah.
Because I know everyone has a different definition, and it's really interesting. I think I've heard of a couple of guests who have so many different views on it, and they're like, oh, it's standing up after you've fallen down. And I think every definition always seems right. Every definition I hear always seems very real. Yeah,
for sure. Everyone's got a different, like you said, definition for themselves. What it means to them to be resilient, and it's not wrong. It's just, how do people cope with, the difficulties in life?
And I think, does that sort of mean that every person whose definition is different, also it comes from their life views and life experiences?
Exactly, because that's how we, go through life, through our own sort of lens. Based on what we have experienced or been exposed to. Like everything's relative.
So what do you think about someone's definition of being immune to stressors and also adversity?
Yeah, so I wouldn't, say that that's incorrect, because immunity implies that we have, some strength to withstand certain stresses. But that doesn't mean we're not, we don't get affected by it at all, right? I think it's more about like a different threshold that people might have. around certain types of crises or obstacles. And so, one person's threshold might be higher than another person's threshold in a particular thing. But, for something else, it could look very much different. So, yeah, like people's immunity to certain things will be different. And so I don't think that's incorrect. But, obviously in life, we can't be fully immune to anything. Immunity only goes so far, I think, for adversity. But, when things are hard, we want to be able to, like you said before, stand back up and continue to move forward with the things that are important to us.
Mm-hmm. And while sort of a lot of people go through different types of emotion, and some people think that they're immune to feeling anything negative or anything bad, going into talking a bit about anger, how would you define what anger is in sort of our emotional sense?
Yeah. So anger is one of those more uncomfortable emotions. So, they get a bad rep and they're like, oh, bad emotions, good emotions. But it just feels uncomfortable, right? But all of our emotions are inherently good because they provide us with some sort of information, whether that's information about ourselves or information about the situation. So typically with anger, that's giving us information that, a boundary of mine has been crossed, or like some sort of injustice that I deem as an injustice has happened to me. And therefore we start to feel these very uncomfortable things.
Okay. And talking about anger a little bit, is everyone sort of going through a different type of anger? Because I know that there's a little threshold that some people's anger is different. The way that they react with anger is very different.
Of course. So I like to think of our emotions more on a spectrum. So rather than 0 to 100, like, of course, we've got, fully calm to like explosive rage or something. But in between, there's all of the potential different types of reactions. But we've got, sorry, I forgot your question.
No, it's just, I think it's just the different types of anger people
yes
experience.
So I go from like, annoyance up to like frustration, anger, rage. And, the expressions of that can be different. So, it could be like being passive aggressive to somebody, you're making snarky comments, pointed comments, to verbal aggression, like raising your voice or swearing potentially, or, making verbal threats and things like that, to physical acts of aggression, and that sort of thing, like either against oneself or objects or other people. So everyone's, those are like the more typical things we associate with anger. That probably is the reason why anger gets a bad rep. But other things associated with anger can be, just speaking up for yourself, standing up for yourself and going, hey, like that's not on. I'm not okay to be talked to like that, or, I don't want to put up with that.
And with anger, I feel like there's always a sense of vulnerability more than when we're sort of happy or joyful.
Yeah.
So going into, what is the role of personal resilience in managing difficult emotions such as anger?
Yeah. So, the more resilient we are, the more we can sort of sit with that uncomfortable feeling and sort of be more reflective and go, oh, like, why was that triggering for me? Or, what is at the heart of this? Or what is it that I want from this other person? If we're not resilient in that way, we might just react, right? We don't actually have a chance to think about and respond to the situation, or think about how we want to be as a person in that moment, and act in a way that we can be proud of.
So when acting in a sort of sense that, what is the point that we sort of get that, okay, do we realize it ourselves that we're a bit too much and we have taken it too far? Or is it other people's reactions that's when we're sort of realizing that it's a bit too much?
I think it depends on the person. Like,
okay,
some people will be, either of those two. Some people won't realize right? And that can be an issue in and of itself, because then maybe, you know, in relationships, people leave them a lot, or, you know, they're not able to stick in, you know, keep long-term jobs or anything like that, because they're constantly, you know, being aggressive to other people, and they don't have the insight as much as other people might try to bring it to them. So yeah, like, you know, some people do recognize and they might feel guilty or ashamed of their behavior afterwards, or, you know, other people might get that negative reaction from a friend or family member, partner, and then go, ooh, okay, like maybe I was in the wrong, or maybe not. Maybe they get more angry. Yeah, it varies completely.
So what are some of the signs that we need to know in ourselves in order to avoid the negative impact it has on either ourselves or even others?
Yeah, so I guess some of the signs would be just, you know, feeling a bit off, noticing that, you know, we are maybe coming towards, you know, this sort of bottled up, sort of self-critical, self-loathing narrative. We're beating ourselves up. Maybe there's like a sense of resentment towards like a partner or a friend or someone, colleague. And then anytime we sort of feel guilt or shame, like that could be also a sign of the trigger that's happened. Like, oh, okay, like I acted in that way and I feel a bit maybe embarrassed or something. And it's like, okay, let's reflect on what happened back there.
So in your line of work and in sort of the practice that you do, how has it been in sort of teaching a client of yours or a patient of yours the fact that their coping skills for anger and their way of going through anger is a little bit too far? Because it must be a really challenging part to sort of tell someone that the emotion, the way that they're reacting is a little bit too much.
Yeah. Well, I don't usually, you know, I try not to judge the client by saying it's too much or whatnot, because like it's a coping strategy, right? So all coping strategies are inherently there to try to help us, but whether or not it's still helpful for the person, you know, maybe it's become an overreaction over time, or maybe it's a disproportionate level to the current situation. But maybe in another situation, it's completely reasonable. So, you know, we try not to generalize and say that, you know, these coping strategies are good or bad or too much or too little. It's just, you know, right now for you as a person, is this working? And is this aligned with who you want to be as a person? Is it helping you work towards your goals? Yeah, so that's kind of how I like to frame it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much of our emotional reactions are from what we learn and what's sort of in ourselves as it is?
Yeah, sure. I think a lot of it is from what we're exposed to. So what we learn like through modeling from, say, our parents or those around us growing up. Because if we see that as the only example, then what else do we know? You know, what other options do we have to react? And another one is just society's like narrative of, you know, anger being bad, and you know, not so much these days. These days I feel like it's a little bit better, but you know, when I was younger, just like, you know, everyone kind of being told, you know, if you're angry, then you're aggressive and that's bad. So, you know, especially for women, you know, we got to keep it under control. But also for men, that's a sort of toxic masculinity side of things. Like they can't show like weakness. They can't show, you know, other emotions, vulnerable emotions like sadness or things like that. So because of that narrative, they've had to suppress all of that stuff. And the only one that is socially like acceptable for men back in those days, through that toxic masculinity lens, it was anger and aggression, and that apparently was fine. So yeah, like I think a lot of it has to do with, you know, what we've seen, what we've been exposed to. But, you know, of course, like, you know, there's going to be individual factors as well, like people's just general temperaments. But I think, you know, it's that that balance of, environment and nature versus nurture, right? Like it's both.
Yeah. Okay. So going through like emotional regulation and sort of understanding your emotions in a way that's in a healthy environment. Because I know when you're saying a lot of people where we learn our emotions from our parents, from people we've met throughout our youth and growing up, how has it been? How easy is it to sort of understand that this is not how you're supposed to act, or this is not how you react to a situation? Because I know a lot of it is not going to be positive in our understanding of how we see it.
Yeah. I think anger is an interesting one because, people can react to aggression in very different ways. If someone's being aggressive, like, so that kind of like, again, pushing into a boundary, then, some people's reaction is to take a step back, so that sort of flight response.
Yeah.
And some people might have the fight response, and then that sort of escalates things, which then doesn't actually resolve anything either. And so, what we want to like figure out is how do we stand our ground, because then they keep pushing and nothing happens. And then eventually they just, take that more respectful step back and go, okay, like this person, is staying firm. And so there's no point in me doing this because then I'm being unreasonable or, this is ineffective, basically.
Yeah. Because it's really interesting when we're talking about anger, it's like you said, it's one of the most uncomfortable emotions that you could ever possibly, especially when you go through it with another person.
Oh.
And sometimes it can be taken too far. Sometimes other people buckle, sometimes you buckle. Yeah. So trying to find that balance, I think it's really interesting, because the way that I sort of go through anger is I get angry at myself first, then other people.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting when, as I get older, that I'm understanding it a little bit more, rather than just, for me, I'm very quick to anger. And I know that's very much got something to do with how I grew up and the way that I understood anger as an emotion, it's first to react, then sort of understand.
Yeah.
So with the types of emotional regulation, what kind of skills are good to sort of just try to take a step back and try to think before you act straight away?
Yeah. Well, with anything, we want to be practicing, right? Like regularly, which means that we're not going to get it right away. So that's the first thing, like patience, people. But, I think with, learning to sort of reflect on your own preferences first and recognizing when a boundary has been crossed in the first place. Knowing that, okay, like I'm actually not okay with this, or, I kind of am okay with this, but I'm annoyed because this person often gets their way and I hardly get my way, for example. And sort of having that, internal reflection, which may come after the fact, initially. And then slowly, the more we do it, it'll come earlier and earlier in the piece. But I think a good way to reflect on that more as like a specific strategy would be to journal and to write things down. And again, this would probably just be after the fact for the most part. Just going, what happened there? What was I feeling? What did I do? What would I rather do next time? How would I like to express my anger next time if this situation occurs again? Is this aligning with who I am or who I want to be? Definitely just getting it out of our heads at some point is good. It could just be like a little dot point on our phone, even. Doesn't have to be a huge narrative.
Yeah, because when I hear about journaling, it's like sit down and you write in a journal.
And a diary. No.
I honestly cannot get my mind to settle down fast enough to write all of my emotions down. So talking about journaling, I get so hung up on the fact that there has to be a structure, it has to be done a certain way.
No, not at all.
It's good that I got the okay now to do it anyway.
Exactly. Just simple dot points. You can have like random prompts of like, I was pissed off, full stop. You know, like that could be your first reflection. That's completely legitimate. And then as you kind of get more into the habit of journaling and writing your thoughts down, then you might find there's something deeper there. But yeah, it doesn't have to be like, let me sit here and analyze everything that's gone through my head ever. You know, there's too much.
No, it's like letters just scrambling everywhere.
No.
So while I'm sort of understanding my own emotions and my own little types of anger, I know that there are a lot of other different types. So what are some of the types that you can sort of list and sort of help us understand what the different types are?
Of anger, sorry?
Yes, of anger.
Yeah, sure. So like annoyance, is like a more lower level thing. It's like more of a niggly thing. You know, I can tolerate it, but I don't really want to. It's not my preference. Okay. So, and then we go to frustration, which is, yes, I can sort of tolerate it, but it's kind of getting to the point where it's becoming more difficult to manage and it's building in me. Another one is resentment. So this is maybe when we've suppressed our needs for too long, and then it sort of comes out in this, uncomfortable feeling towards another person. Might be a family member, friend, partner, colleague, or boss or something, and it's uncomfortable because we have to keep being in a relationship with them, and we want it to be nice. We don't want it to have these sort of like sour feelings. Anger is, the overarching emotion we're talking about, which again is about that boundary crossing, that feeling of that sense of being disrespected in some way, or not having our needs met or prioritized in some way, and then rage. So rage is like a complete injustice or a complete, our sense of a complete injustice has occurred to us, and then people might act out in rage.
Okay. Well, how do those different types of anger sort of come out in our behaviors?
Yeah, so just sort of touching on rage there. When we think of the word rage, typically I think like road rage or like people going on a rampage or something. Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm a habit of the road rage kind of person.
Well, when I'm thinking rage, maybe you're not that level, which is good.
Okay.
But more like, getting arrested for assault and, really dangerous driving and stuff.
It's the internal rage, road rage.
Yeah. Also, okay, that's more help. Not the healthiest, but no. we can work on it. But it's the sense of it going through their minds. It's like this sense of injustice, like how dare this other person do that to me? Like they should know better, and they did that to me on purpose. This sense of like a personal attack, and this sense of like, well, I need to teach them a lesson. That sort of narrative to get someone to that point where they would maybe get out of their car and physically assault someone else. That level of like build up in their minds. Versus like, most people that probably get annoyed, which is fair enough. Someone's cutting you off and it's like, oh my God, that was dangerous. And like, what the, learn how to drive. So there's this assumption of incompetence of the other person, but, we're not getting out of our cars.
That's me. I'll take that.
Exactly. You're the majority. You're the majority.
Okay, that's good. So what can we do to sort of learn from that? Because I know it's not always, other than journaling, when it comes to road rage, there's some things that sort of, it's set in you. For example, it's like something that you're just set to understand. How can we learn to take out that habit or to take out the behavior that we proceed with the frustration?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's like, again, that idea of like, is it helpful for you? Like at the end of the day is, teaching that other person a lesson, actually got to teach that other person a lesson, number one. but is it going to be helpful for you in any way if you get arrested? Like probably not.
No.
And, even if we go down the spectrum a lot to just being annoyed, okay, it's like, how is this stranger going to impact your life, right? Like, are they going to ruin your mood for the day? Is that something that has to happen, right? It's like, yeah, they could be cutting you off for any number of reasons, but at the end of the day, we're not going to find out, and we're probably not going to see them again. So, we're safe, everything's fine, it's not great, not ideal, but we have to accept that, sometimes these things happen and it's annoying, but I can move on with my day.
Mm-hmm. And other than sort of the consequence of getting arrested, going down to the sort of lesser things like frustration and annoyance, what are some of the potential consequences of not addressing that anger in a healthy way?
Yeah, sure. So, sometimes feeling guilt, like if we're beating ourselves up, like you said before, like the internalized anger, like, oh, I should be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that. That sort of self-criticism can lead to, low self-esteem, self-loathing on the more extreme end, sense of guilt or shame as well if we're acting on some of those frustrations, or if we feel like we're constantly going around in the same sort of cycle. That those can be some of the side effects of that. But also in relationships, as I mentioned before, like that resentment building and building and building. And then at some point coming to a head. And then, people maybe saying things that they might regret later or doing things that, again, they might regret.
Yeah, so what's the impact? Like what other things does it impact when it comes to those types of anger that you've just listed and one's going through their daily life?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's got to be things that, aren't ideal for us in going through our daily life. Nothing's going to be perfect. But I think there are certain things that, will trigger different people. So that's why the reflection is important to see where your own sort of triggers lie. Because, one thing that might bother someone might not bother another person, right? And, they might express their anger in different ways depending on what it is. And I think I use the example of, when you are an adult and then you go back to stay with your parents, everything is annoying, right? And it's like, oh God, like, being treated like a teenager again. And you're like, oh
yes.
It's kind of like, you start to recognize, like this is a trigger for me. And I don't know why I'm doing this, but, I'm doing it. Because normally in my adult life, I wouldn't react like that anymore. So it's just sort of learning about, what is triggering for us and, how that affects us each individually.
And when we're talking about the strategies a little earlier, sometimes there is a way to let out a good frustration in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But somehow there's this phrase that I sort of listened that I heard of is it good to let it all hang out and let everything just sort of release either on a person that you trust? Because I know that we are more likely to release emotions on people that we trust to stay after it, or people that would just be allowing you to vent a little bit more.
Yeah. It depends. It depends on the person, if they know that that's your intention. It's good to have a disclaimer in there. I just need to vent, right? Like I don't need you to help me solve this or anything like that. I just need someone to talk to. Because otherwise, if they start telling you what to do, giving you advice, you're just like, okay.
Make it even more.
Exactly. So it is good to have some sort of anger release. Letting it all hang out, if it's like in the physical sense, I would say let's be careful how we do that. There are healthy ways to let it out physically, but we don't want to get ourselves hurt or another person hurt, basically. So things like breaking things or hurting other people it's definitely a no. That's not helpful. But other ways like high intensity exercise, which might include boxing, as long as you don't imagine the person who you're angry at while you're doing it, because studies have shown that's not helpful. But
I actually didn't know it wasn't.
Yeah, no, because then that builds your anger and might build that frustration towards them.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes more sense, because I've always seen in films, for example, they tape like the person's face on like a dartboard and then they throw the darts at it.
Yeah, no, not good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the action itself is a good physical release, but having like imagining the person there, is not particularly helpful. But yeah, like other things like throwing a tennis ball at a brick wall, like on the full, like pegging it, and then catching it on the full.
Okay.
Something like that can be actually quite cathartic, but also humorous. So, you're throwing it as hard as you can. So you're releasing that physical energy, but then trying to catch it on the full. It's a bit of a shock or a jolt. And then you don't see how you can do it. Or maybe it makes you more angry. So you keep throwing it and keep trying, right? So either way, it gets out.
Well, that sounds like that sounds like a really good method. And in a way, is sort of release it on your own as well. When you're talking to someone about the frustration, how does it help your mental health in order to let it release sometimes, like for me, for example, I definitely take it too far when I start out very nice and then suddenly it ends up just me being a little bit more mad and the level just keeps increasing.
Of course.
When I need to let out frustration, for example, when is it a bit too much that I'm sort of just letting it out more than I probably should?
Well, I think it's not so much that you're letting it out more than you should, but the fact that you're getting angry again indicates that, the issue hasn't been resolved, right? That's why, as you're sort of retelling it, you're almost reliving it again, which is why you're feeling angry again. All right. So it's this unresolvedness that, there's still something there that we are not okay with, that we haven't necessarily rectified or accepted. And so that's maybe where we need to, what we want to work on, as opposed to not feeling angry again, if that makes sense. Because again, anger, information.
Yes. And how can people identify that sort of underlying emotion that they are suppressing for so long that might be driving their anger?
Yeah, well, I think for most people, there is something underneath anger. Anger is just like the surface level, like the feeling that makes people almost like feel a little bit more in control. I know that might sound strange because like when people lash out aggressively, like that doesn't feel like control. But compared to some of the other uncomfortable emotions, like anger has this, sense of like, I'm doing something, or I'm letting it out. As opposed to something, say, sadness or helplessness or anxiety, fear, disappointment, when they feel vulnerable. And it's like, okay, well, what do I do with this? Like, I don't know how to deal with this. So I just let it out in other way.
And other than the other points that we've mentioned, what are some other healthy ways in order to express or even communicate our anger to another party?
Yeah. So assertive communication is definitely a good one. So basically that idea of someone's pushing a boundary and you're standing firm, assertive communication is that. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of different people, they have different ideas of what assertiveness means. So people who tend to retreat or be a bit more passive, they think that assertiveness is the same as aggression. It's not. People who are aggressive think that assertiveness is being passive. Okay, it's not. So it's its own thing.
Wow, I didn't think about it like that. I always thought assertion is getting control or getting power, or it's not exactly what I was thinking.
No, so it's not this someone wins, because typically when you are angry at someone and you want to do something about it, you have to deal with this person again. right? Like, if it's a stranger, like in the road situation, then we need to sort of learn to let those things go, because again, we're not going to deal with that. It's not going to help us in any way. But if it's in some sort of relationship, whether it be work, home, school, life, anywhere, then we have to deal with them again. So it doesn't make sense to sort of keep going through those unhealthy dynamics, constantly, because then, things will end, and we don't want that to happen, usually. Okay. Yeah.
So how do you, like, for example, when you see the person that you've sort of expressed your anger to, that sort of made you a little bit more frustrated with them, if you have to work with them, for example, like you go to them constantly in familial settings or things like that, how do you see them again without reliving the whole situation?
Yeah. So, it would be about reflecting on your boundaries first. So thinking about, well, what is it about this person's behavior towards me that is triggering me? And is this something I can manage or tolerate? Why would I be managing or tolerating it? Maybe they're your boss, right? And you need a job. So you can't just go like, F you, boss. I mean, you could, but you might, get in trouble. But the thing is, you just want to sort of assess, because we do things for a reason. And if the reason is to keep the peace, okay, like that might be your reason. But if you're tired of keeping the peace, it's not actually working, and, it doesn't actually solve anything, then maybe we have to do it a different way.
Can you go ahead and go through that whole situation? Like, for example, if you're seeing family after a long time and you're in a family gathering, can you completely avoid that person? Or do you recommend sort of just facing up to them and just trying to see them in a positive way?
I think that really depends.
Okay.
Because as I mentioned earlier, I like working in the cultural space as well. So, some techniques may not work in the same way, depending on what cultural background you have.
Yeah.
So, in typical, more typically like a Western style or Caucasian background, if people have their individual opinions, and those individual opinions tend to be more respected, versus in more, say, like Eastern or collectivist cultures, then, it's about the group harmony, the hierarchy a lot more. And you don't speak up against elders or anything like that in any way, kind of thing. Otherwise, things will happen.
No, I'm definitely in that space. I'm part Asian, so having that whole culture background to it as well, there's no way that you can avoid that person. No. And it's very interesting when you sort of see just how much you're having to suppress.
Yes.
And reliving that situation in a constant setting.
Yeah. So I'm gonna, I guess, share more of like the in an ideal way, we this is how we be assertive. When we can express ourselves, when we can, know what our boundaries are, and be able to communicate that clearly with the other person, who in theory is open to hearing that and respecting that. Okay. So that's more like it's us against the problem kind of mentality, right? Like we're in this relationship together, or we're trying to keep a working relationship, and therefore, let's solve this problem of a boundary being crossed. Okay, so that will be where I start, and then we'll move on to like the more tricky, like cultural stuff.
Okay,
the juicy stuff.
Yes.
So like it would be, being assertive is actually just about being neutral, standing your ground, being firm, but also recognizing that, we're trying to work towards this relationship being strong or being repaired. Okay. So we start off basically, like, this is very like textbook language, so people have to reword it in their own ways, because no one's going to be like, I feel like this, maybe teachers teach the kids these days like that, but no, it's more just empathizing with the other person first, so that you show them, like, I'm not here to fight you, because as soon as we go, oh, you did this and that made me angry, like, of course they're like, oh no, but you did this, and everyone gets defensive and then keeps going. All right.
Yeah.
So if we're like, oh, I get that you've been really stressed lately, they're like, yeah, I have. Or, oh, it's not that I've been stressed, I'm just really tired. Or, they might clarify. Okay. So for the most part, you're like getting them to start listening to you. Because when we're fighting, we're typically not listening to the other party at all. We're just wanting to get out what we want to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then the second part would be, okay, I've recognized that you're feeling a certain way about things. I'm feeling a certain way about things as well. So I know that you've been really stressed lately with, heavy workload. I feel really embarrassed when, feedback's given in a public setting. So let's say a boss has criticized you or something in front of everyone, and so it's like, this is my feeling, right? Like, it's not your problem as such. It's not because you did that. It's because I feel this way when I got called out. Okay. And that would be generally across the board, right? Like, if someone else called me out, I'd also feel uncomfortable, right? Or I'd also feel embarrassed. And then we go to the compromise. Okay. So you feel away, I feel away. Now what do we do? Okay. And so, I would appreciate it if, or I prefer it if in the future, we have feedback, sessions in private in an office or something, coming up with something that is, doable for the both of you. And again, sort of meeting the person in the middle first, because then you're showing like good intent, goodwill. You've got goodwill, and then they're more likely to come meet you in the middle or make another suggestion, because again, it's a working relationship. You want it to keep going. So that's just like an example of that.
Okay. And how does that occur? For example, if one side is willing to compromise and one side is not.
Yes.
Because there's always going to be that group that's just not going to want to.
Yes.
That has a lot of ego, for example.
Exactly. So that's the tricky part, right? Like, that's in an ideal world where, both people are like, oh my God, I didn't realize, I'm so sorry, and like, great, best friends again. Okay.
Yeah.
But in other situations, it's like, oh God, like, how do I do this? Then we have to be firm, right? We have to be, okay, I don't appreciate being spoken to that way. And just having to remind them, like, well, I'm your boss. I can do X, Y, Z. It's like, well, yes, you might be my boss, but that doesn't mean you can speak to me that way, and just sort of reaffirming that messaging. And sometimes that boundary, then, we really have to reflect on, well, am I okay to tolerate this? Why am I tolerating it? If I am, I'm staying here because I need a job or I need the money, and what does that mean then? But are you okay to put up with that if they're not hearing what your boundaries are?
And I know, so we're going into the next section of the show when it's talking about practice and habits. Now this is just your personal way of trying to understand anger and trying to go through your practice. What is a practice that you do to deal or handle the uncomfortableness of anger?
Yeah. So that old say, take a deep breath. That's a good one. It just gives you pause, before you decide what you do. Okay. Yeah. But again, that doesn't always work, because it hasn't become a habit. Right? Like, it's all well and good, to say, take a deep breath when you like, but, you have to that takes baby steps there. So, again, that whole idea of journaling or reflecting, let's just call it reflecting after the fact, in whatever form you'd like. People might record themselves talking about the thing. It doesn't have to be writing. But it's more this idea of like, let's get it out of our head somehow and think about, well, what happened? Why do I think it happened in terms of me, right? Like, not them. Like, obviously something they've done feels uncomfortable. That's why we've developed this feeling. But well, why am I getting triggered by that? why am I upset if someone doesn't listen to me, for example? Or why am I upset that that person took my stapler again without asking? You know, what is it about that situation that triggers me? And then reflecting on, okay, well, the reason is because I feel disrespected, for example. Okay, and why is it important for me to feel respected? You know, we dig into that a little bit more. And then we can reflect on, well, what would I rather do in the future? You know, we can go, okay, well, ideally, I might say, you know, I know that, you know, you're in a rush. It would be nice, like, I'd appreciate it if you just let me know that you're taking the stapler so that I know where it is. You know, something like that. You know, we'd just do a little bit of a practice script, and then that just sort of solidifies in our mind. Okay, like there is another option. Like I don't have to just take it, or I don't have to snap. You know, I can do something else.
Okay. And what are 3 good things that you've found about going through this practice of just taking things slowly?
Yeah. So one is being less reactive. So, you know, when you're less reactive, we feel more in control, and therefore we feel more like ourselves, right? Like we're not doing things that, you know, we regret later on, or go, ooh, cringe, like, why did I do that kind of thing? The other one, we're able to sort of focus on what's in our control as opposed to the other person, because other people aren't in our control. As much as we might like to think that we can change other people's behavior or thoughts and stuff like that, we can't. Okay, we might be able to influence them, but if we're getting aggressive, they're probably going to get aggressive back, you know, or shut down, implicate us, you know. So that's not going to change anything. So let's focus on what I can do differently. You know, I can think about it differently. I can communicate differently. I can act differently. You know? And all in the present moment, I can do those things. And then that sort of helps settle us as well, because we have that ability to enact it.
Okay.
And I guess the last thing would be just learning more about yourself and just developing yourself as a person, learning about your own triggers and how to overcome some of them. Obviously, nothing's perfect. So, you know, sometimes when you do go back and stay with your parents for a little bit too long, you might get a bit narky again. But, you know, no one's perfect. So then, you know, okay, my boundary, my cutoff time is I can only stay with them for this amount of days.
Yes. Yeah. It's very much like that.
Yeah.
I think that is one of the most relatable parts of going through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, other than that, what are some of the other challenges that occurs when you go through this practice? Because while there are so many good positive things, there are always the kind of ways that you are just not able to do.
Yeah, of course. You know, again, not perfect. We will react to things sometimes. We will forget to reflect. We will feel like our anger is completely justified and our lashing out, you know, or venting or whatever is justified. But, you know, it's sort of that, again, what are the consequences, right? So once you see that, then, you know, hopefully it helps bring to light some of those issues. But, you know, with that, you know, it is kind of contingent on that ability to pause and reflect, which may be difficult for some people.
And how do you find the time to be able to go through this practice when you sort of realize that your boundary or that your anger has sort of been taken in effect?
Yeah. I guess it comes down to the priorities in life, I guess. You know, and there's always going to be the same amount of time every day, but how we choose to use that time is up to every individual person. So if the anger has come out in some way that is not helpful for us or not aligned with who we want to be, then like we have to find that time to go, okay, what was that about? And, you know, is there anything I can do about that now?
And do you set up a certain time to go through this, or is it sort of when you first realize that you are starting to get angry?
Yeah, so I think for myself, I like to journal every second day just so I can keep on top of things, and it's more like a preventative thing, and to make sure I have that regular sort of release as well. By just sort of thinking, okay, what's been going on, or what do I have coming up? Is there any anxiety around that? Am I feeling upset by something that's happened, or am I feeling really stressed, so that it doesn't build into that anger or resentment? But yes, of course, if something does happen, someone does cross a boundary and I do feel angry, then I try to reflect on that, in the moment and why. That might be the case, and say what I need from them in that moment. Or, if it's a cultural thing and a family thing, then pause and think about, how do I want to be here?
Yeah.
And go from there. But again, practice makes progress.
Yes. No, I'm totally with you on there. And I think the practice, just getting into the habit of journaling, I did do it during lockdown. I will say, I did every day. I was just journaling constantly. But I think setting up that time is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Especially when you're running everywhere, you're hardly ever going to be able to make a diary entry or a journal entry every single day as much as I used to.
Yeah. But again, that's what is our idea of journaling, right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah,
that's true.
Okay, because if we're trying to write a narrative, a novel every time, of course, it's got to take time.
No, exactly. Yes, so, I will try that one line or that one paragraph or a few sentences.
Yep.
Yeah,
you don't have to fill the page. You don't have to fill the book. It's okay.
I'm just looking at that empty space. I'm like, I've got to fill that now.
No, you don't have to. It's your book. You get to decide what you do with it.
Okay. All right. I will try to take that into a practice of mine, and I will, I'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Just write whatever you up to the point where you feel okay, but that's everything that's on my mind. And you don't have to push it further, for the very beginning. And then later when it becomes more of a habit, of time, okay, I like to do it in the morning, or I like to do it in the evening. When you just kind of get your diary out to write something, then you're I'm just doing it now. Great. Okay. So then now we can think a bit harder.
Oh, that sounds good. And how do you think that going through this practice has impacted your understanding of resilience and also the understanding of your life in general?
Yeah, I think it definitely has helped with my resilience. I notice when I haven't been journaling as consistently that I just, have a lot of busyness in my head, a lot of thoughts rolling around. Maybe I ruminate on certain situations more where, maybe someone has, annoyed me, or I have acted in a way that I'm not proud of. And then, I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't written things down for a while. So just been keeping it all in here, right? And it's hard because if we keep it all in our minds, it will keep whirling around. It will keep churning through. So we have to let it out, which is why therapy is great, because you just talk to your therapist, you let it out in that way, in a constructive way, because they can hold space for you. You journal, you can do it yourself, put it down on paper. It actually activates a different part of our brain, which is pretty trippy. So instead of it just being the emotional center, the blood goes to other areas like motor skills and memory and visual. So I find that cool. I
actually didn't know it did that.
Yeah. So that's why it takes the edge off the emotion a bit as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. I think I'm gonna have to really try and experiment with journaling and see how that goes.
Yeah.
So now we're going into the next section. It's the questions from audience.
Okay.
We have quite a little bit of questions, and I think they're all pretty interesting.
Okay.
So I'll get your response to those.
Yep.
So the first one is, do you believe anger represents suppressed emotions or trauma, or is it just a personality type that is unresolvable?
Ooh, okay. So yeah, I do think it comes up as a result of suppressed emotions. Yeah, in terms of trauma, for sure. Like, the sense of being maybe angry at the world for an injustice that might have occurred to the person, or anger at the person, the perpetrator of whatever the trauma was. I think that's, perfectly understandable if we think about it in the context of boundary crossing, right? So a trauma is, a boundary that's been crossed. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In terms of a personality trait that can't be resolved, there are certain personalities where people are more susceptible to certain behaviors or things like that. But I wouldn't say it's unresolvable, because then I wouldn't have become a clinical psychologist. I think that's always hope, as long as we're alive. Okay. Yeah, we can do something with everything. Okay. So yeah, like, sometimes it might be more difficult because, again, maybe like insight might be lacking, or there's not necessarily in their mind like a consequence that's negative enough for them to change their behavior. But that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Okay. So when you talk about the unresolvable personality types, like sometimes your personality is just, you've got an anger in you. That's just how you're just reacting to things. So when you're talking about it being being able to be resolved, Is it more like canceling it out completely, or is it just sort of finding ways to find it in a healthy way to release it?
Yeah. So more the second one, like we learn how to manage it, right? Because we don't know, like, hypothetically, what the anger is about. So that might be, this person might have been traumatized many times in their life. And so, yeah, like if we look at it from an outsider's perspective, maybe they're completely justified in their feeling of anger. But, does that anger help them? Does it help them move forward? Does it help them be the person they want to be or live the life they want to live, if they're sort of holding on to that constantly? So, it's something that, the person has to want to move past as well, to a certain extent, so that they can, work through it. But yeah, like, again, it's not unresolvable.
Okay. The next one is, how can we communicate our emotions and needs to others in a healthy and constructive way without even resorting to anger?
Yeah, I think that's, a good idea. Like, prevention is better than a cure. All right. So, that's sort of like tapping into our own needs and being able to express our needs on a regular basis, right? Because then we're not suppressing anything, right? Which means that there's nowhere for that anger to build, because, people aren't crossing our boundaries because people know exactly where they stand with us, and they know that they can't cross those boundaries because we say what they are all the time. Yeah, being clear with that in our communication, but also internally first, that, okay, like, this is where I stand on these particular things. This is what I will or won't tolerate. And this is why I will or won't tolerate it. And then, saying it before it builds into anything.
And the next one goes, how can we cultivate compassion and empathy towards others and ourselves, even in the face of difficulty or frustrating situations?
Yeah, for sure. So that's the thing, like, when we can empathize with another person, like, sometimes that can help dull the level of anger down, so that we can start thinking a bit more. But we don't want to be empathizing and then discounting our own feeling, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is, okay, that person might have been treated that way by their parents, and that's why they're lashing out at me as their partner, because they've got, attachment issues or something. Okay, we can understand that, but that doesn't mean I have to allow that treatment of myself.
Okay. And how, like, especially in relationships, it must be really hard with the different ways that we communicate our anger or deal with anger. How can you sort of have that conversation with your partner if they're not even willing to admit the fact that they do react that way?
If they're not willing to admit it,
Yes.
I would say try to go see a marriage counselor just to talk it out in a safe setting. Yeah, with someone who can hold space for both of you. It's really hard, again, to convince someone who doesn't have insight or a willingness, at least, to work on an issue, because people have their own free will and their own thoughts and their own choices. So if someone's not willing or able to see that, then there's an issue there that needs to be resolved with maybe external help. But if someone is willing, then ideally not in the situation that's heightened. Wait until both parties have calmed down and then sort of bring it up and address it with the partner and go, this is what I think or see. This is what I'm gathering based on what I know about you, kind of thing. What do you think?
So not in a way that sort of like feels like they're being diagnosed very early by a partner. Because I think, honestly, when it comes to that, there's always that line where I think a couple of people, they're like, oh, you this and this and this is what you are. And they turn to Google and they just put the label on it straight away.
On the wrong foot, right? No, so nothing like that. But it's just, I know that you were really upset with me earlier before. It kind of felt out of proportion. I'm not sure what's going on, but I know that there's been some stress with you and your mum or something. Is that something that's still bothering you? Or I wonder why, is more opening up, that empathy allows you to think about, how they're feeling generally and tying it to different things that you can maybe discuss more openly and therefore understand one another better.
Okay. So while we know that anger can be done in a positive way, how can we harness it in order to make it a bit more constructive?
Yeah. So, to make it more constructive, understanding when we do get that sense of anger, okay, what is this saying about me? What is this saying about the situation that I'm not okay with? And therefore, okay, what am I going to do about it differently in the future? Right? So am I going to speak up, or am I going to defend myself, or am I going to defend the other person because that's in line with my values? So it can be a really important sort of self-development thing, that when we sort of recognize what our anger is trying to actually do, as opposed to just reacting to it.
And this one is probably my personal favorite of a question. It's why are break rooms or smash rooms so effective in releasing frustration?
Yes, because physically we have anger, it builds up, we get really tense, okay, we get that sort of adrenaline and we need to let it out in some way, right? And that's why people, act aggressively sometimes, because they're trying to let it out, but unfortunately they might be hurting themselves. They might be doing something that they regret, like breaking something important to them, or now they have to clean it up and feel ashamed that they've broken something at home, or maybe the kids saw, or whatever, So break rooms are a socially acceptable way. You pay for a service, you go in there, you break a bunch of stuff, that's what you're expecting. It's okay. You let it out, right? So that's a situation where you can let it all hang out.
Yeah, and I've always wondered why it's always so effective, because every time I go, it feels so much like a power release. You're in a positive vulnerability, which is I've always wondered why physical exertion is a way of release.
Yeah. So physically, if we think about our biological system, when we're feeling angry because a boundary has been crossed, basically we feel threatened in some way. And so therefore our sympathetic nervous system gets activated, right? Adrenaline, increased heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, tension, all of that sort of stuff that's related to fight or flight or freeze. And we in cave people days, we would have to like run away from the predator or fight the predator, right? Or hide, but the only way we would feel physically better afterwards was when we physically let it out. So in fight or flight, you get that because you have to like physically exhaust yourself to get out of that situation alive. But in freeze, you freeze for a bit, saber-toothed tiger goes away, and then you like shake it out, right? Like if you've ever been in a car accident and you're like, oh God, okay. Yeah. Like that's how you're sort of feeling. And a lot of the time with anger as well, like we get that pent up sort of like, ugh. And that's why you sometimes see people so angry that they're shaking.
Well, it makes a lot more sense as like, especially when you relate it back to the primate days and the way that you used to that you see in films of the way that they exerted themselves was like hitting something and breaking things. So it makes a lot of sense now. I didn't think about it like that. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So again, we just do it in ways that don't hurt ourselves or hurt other people, right? And don't cause us regret later. Like if we break something at home, it's like, oh, now I have to clean that up. Whereas if you go to a break room, like that's what, it's there for.
No, I'm so glad I go now. I think that's my way of therapy. That's my way of journaling. Perfect. So
exactly. Yeah. Whatever works.
So now we're going into the last part of the show, which is the open mic. It gives you a chance to share anything that you are passionate about, anything that you're working on currently. We've got the last few minutes or so. I'd love for you to share what's on your mind with our audience.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, myself and my business partner, Austin, we both started a practice called Reimagine Psychology Melbourne. And the reason why we wanted to reimagine psychology was because typically it's been a very like Eurocentric, Freudian sort of vibe where, the people would go to see a psychologist who was the expert and then get advice from them. They would be told, this is what you have to do. This is what's wrong with you and all of that sort of stuff. And then off you go. Your problems are solved. Okay. So myself and Austin were like, well, yeah, no. Like we're in a different generation of psychologists now. So it's like psychology in general is different these days, thankfully. Nothing wrong back then. Definitely lots of people got help from it. And not to say that everyone practiced in that way. But, these days, again, it's more about collaboration. It's more about, understanding that you yourself have agency and then you can do things, that work best for you. And then you, inherently have strengths. So there's different, umbrellas of psychology that practice in slightly different ways, but that's our overall way of approaching things at Reimagine. So basically we wanted to make a safe space for people who historically might have avoided therapeutic settings because they maybe didn't feel welcome. So people from different cultural backgrounds, LGBTQIA plus community, just anybody who just felt maybe that the old way of approaching things or they couldn't quite connect as well, or it felt quite intimidating. And we just wanted it to be a more like down to earth service where we would take things into consideration. I mentioned culture as a thing that we're very passionate about. But it's not just about, like just because I'm Asian doesn't mean I understand all Asian. It's that we're more open-minded to go, okay, well, people see things differently and people do things differently and people prefer different things. So let's see what you prefer and how you would like to kind of operate. So both Austin and I work in slightly different areas of psychology. So he's got more like the ADHD side of things, which is coming out as more of more like awareness, especially in adults. And for myself, I do, like you mentioned before, like chronic pain stuff, and other bits and pieces like anxiety, depression, anything cultural related come at us. We're both in that space. Austin's got the male perspective. I've got the female perspective, both from Asian backgrounds. We're both second generation immigrants. So yeah, we definitely passionate about that.
No, I think that sounds amazing, especially in the way that it's open to everyone and it's inclusive in a way that you don't normally see in sort of the normal areas of psychology, especially when you go, like, I think I said this earlier, when the way that they portray it in films and things like that. So it's very much in a space that feels comfortable, feels homely, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, that's what we hope to do with the office, like, vibe. It might be a bit like interior design wise, I don't know about the colors and everything together, but you know, it was what we thought looked nice and felt nice and was a bit more comfy for people.
Well, that sounds amazing. So if there is a way that an audience member would like to get in touch with the business, get in touch with either you or Austin, is there a way that they are able to?
Yeah, so they can email hello@reimaginepsychology.melbourne, and one of our lovely admin team will be in touch with them. Currently, I'm only doing telehealth because I'm actually in Brisbane permanently.
Yep.
But Austin's still in Melbourne, and he works out of the office there. So you know, still able to go do face-to-face appointments there if you'd like. But yeah, that's have a look at our website, reimaginepsychology.melbourne. There's also some free resources there, some blog articles that we've both written about different topics in psychology or different areas that we're interested in working in. Have a look at some of those free things, come with tips and stuff like that as well. Yeah.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I'll definitely have the link and the email down below, so it's easy access for our audience members. If they want to learn more about the company, learn more about what you do, and maybe get in touch with either one of you. So that is amazing.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, for joining me on the show today. I actually did learn a lot. There's not many shows that I come on and say that I've learned something, but I have actually learned a lot. I'm going to try out the journaling and see how that goes.
Just a sentence.
Yes, perfect. I will try to get that done.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode.
You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps others find us and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Tia Harmer. Thanks for tuning in.